had a suggestion from Franny P come in, and I very much want to look at it with y'all. I've only seen the headline. I wanna watch it raw, but I think I've got some good news, just based on the headline. Even though I understand that it'll be a troubling one. This was on Morning Joe on MSNBC. The inexplicably named Willie Geis is out there. Sorry, it's like a 1950s salesman, right? I don't know why that throws me. But anyway, he's out there talking about how young people are less likely to vote and less likely to identify as Democrats. Don't worry. Half of that to me is actually very good news, but the other half is concerning. Let's break out what's what.
More news on the Supreme Court rulings handed down last week. One of them on affirmative action, another on student loan forgiveness, and a case that allows businesses to refuse service to LGBTQ Americans if they have a religious objection. Conservatives in Congress and across the country applauded those decisions. Democrats on Capitol Hill united against them. Polling, perhaps, though, is less cut and dried. A Washington Post poll late last year showed 63% of Americans were against considering race in college admissions. Only 30.
Real quick. Conservatives were out applauding the revoking of not civil rights, but civil protections. They were out there applauding that you can now discriminate in your business again, just like it was 1950. Don't ever let a conservative get away with quoting Martin Luther King. Just want to say, for the record, they never really had. It was always audacious of them to do that, given that they were the very people who were spraying him with hoses and sicking dogs on him and his followers. But now, come on. Now there's no questioning it at all. It's comical.
36% agree with that idea. For the ruling on refusing LGBTQ people's services, results vary widely based on how the poll's question is asked. In a Pew poll from a few months back, 60% of American adults said they were in favor of a business refusing to provide service in situations where it could suggest support for LGBTQ issues for which they have a religious objection. And a recent NBC News poll that asked if voters supported President Loan's student loan forgiveness plan showed 44% say it was a bad idea versus 43% in favor. Let's bring in Director of Polling at the Institute of Politics at Harvard University, John Della Volpe. He's an MSNBC contributor and author of the book titled Fight: How Gen Z is Channeling Their Fear and Passion to Save America. That's now out in paperback. John, good morning. So you got some new polling.
I am so damn proud of that generation. But let's get my heart good and broken.
For us today, what are some of your takeaways about how young people are feeling about what's happening at the Supreme Court and beyond?
Thanks, Willie, for having me. Yes, this is a review of a couple of decades of polling that we've been conducting at the Harvard Institute of Politics. And essentially, when I look at younger voters, 18 to 29-year-olds, mostly Gen Z, keep in mind that this cohort, 18 to 29-year-olds, with their older millennial brothers and sisters, will be about 40% of the electorate. And when I look at this cohort today compared to this place in the 2020 cycle, I find that younger people are less likely to vote. They're less likely to identify as Democrat. They are less likely to follow the news. And they are less likely, importantly, to believe that politics can make a tangible difference in the country and their lives individually.
All right. So that is pretty much what I was expecting to hear. We'll listen to the details for sure in a moment. But I want to talk about that little, the scary graphic up there. This is, young voters who consider themselves Democrats. All right, so generally less likely to, let's talk about the bad news first. Less likely to vote, less likely to think voting will do anything. That's poison. We have year and a half to cure them of that nonsense. No, it is incredibly important that they get out and vote. They specifically. Incredibly important. We need to show them that what MAGA did worked and that we can do it too. Lean on your politicians. Pressure them. Bust their chops every day. Make their lives hell. You put them in power, but that ain't the end of it. It's not. That's the beginning. You have an agenda, good. You can play the game. But only if you first win the election. So, Democrats, historically, have won elections, and then the Democrat voters go home and do nothing. They don't do anything with it. Because they assume that their politicians will go out and fulfill their will. That is not what happens. So, what do? We do what MAGA did. Once they have no excuses, once we have a Blue House, Senate, and White House, of which we have a huge opportunity coming up. Once that happens, then the fun work begins. That's the harvest time, baby. That's where we are enjoying 3-course meals at the end of every workday. Because we're going to go out there and force them to support policies we want. That's when we start protesting outside the doors of Democrats who haven't even said they're not going to vote in favor of something we want, but have been iffy on it, haven't been full-throated supporters. That's when we get to, I can't wait for this part. I hope I'm able to keep this thing going till we get to this part, because it's going to be fun. That's when we get to bully people that are wealthy. If you're a senator, you get a big fat paycheck. And we have a right and an obligation, a moral obligation, to bully them. I can't wait. Let's do it. Ooh, let's do it. Let's make them vote for stuff that makes their investments worth less. Yes. Make them vote for requirements to traverse their districts, if it's House of Representatives, once a year using only public transportation, and watch them scramble. I can't wait. Oh, I can't wait. It's going to be delightful. But that's how we encourage these people to go out and vote, is we tell them what we're going to do with it. How it's not just going to have to be a matter of faith and trust in a bunch of scum, frankly. But what's that other thing? From 2019 to 2023, what changed? Number one, well, there's a Democrat in the White House. Number two, so there's less pressure to say, I'm a Democrat, I'm supporting X, Y, or Z. Number two, as people have been waking up to how this works, particularly the young folks who are incredibly savvy, as they have been waking up, they have come to see the Democrats for what they are, which is to say, not a very left-leaning party. In fact, they, in just about any other country in the world, would be considered a conservative party based on the policies that they support. Democrats, I'm talking about, as a party, as a whole. Democrats would be conservative in England. They'd be conservative in Norway. They'd be conservative in Canada. Think about that. That's next door for me. And the party I have found I vote for consistently would be called conservative in Canada. So these young folks saying, I'm not a Democrat, to me, that's not very worrying. To me, that's a sign that they have learned a lot. I don't think that means they got more conservative suddenly, especially combined with the fact that they think that voting won't do anything. It tells me that what we are seeing is the beginnings of the flaws in all Democrats, which are convincing ourselves that it's simply easier not, there's no point in fighting, and since it's easier not to fight, you may as well stay home and eat a bowl of cereal. We gotta cure them, the youth, of that nonsense. But the rest, I'm not concerned about.
Tangible difference in the country and in their lives individually.
And that's just a frustration with the system that they have watched since they were born fail them again and again in so many different ways. So what's your sense of the way these Supreme Court decisions, John, may impact the energy to go out and vote, the energy to become active in the process?
Yeah, I think, Willie, the combination of the Supreme Court and the Republican Congress, we talk about baseball, it's like a hanging curveball over the plate for Democrats. But Democrats need to identify that and to take advantage of that. This is just the second year in a row where younger people continue to feel under attack. A year ago, of course, we know it's a third of women losing, a third of women in individual states losing control of their reproductive health. And today we see kind of attacks on members of the LGBTQ community. We see it more difficult for working class and people of color to attend college, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's one attack after another, and that's just by the Supreme Court. You know, earlier you talked about what's happening in Florida and other places like that as well, in terms of this generation really responding, I think, hopefully to kind of stand up and get the backs of those who are more vulnerable even than themselves.
And Mara, last year we saw a seismic shift after the Dobbs decision, completely energizing women, in particular young women, to go out and vote in the midterm elections and changing the face of our politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the questions I have looking at that data is whether there's anything that can actually bring some of those voters back. I mean, you saw much higher turnout, for example, in states like Michigan, where their abortion was a direct ballot issue. So is that something that not only Democrats, but those who support women's right to choose, for example, need to look at? And the Democratic Party should be looking at this data and should be concerned. I mean, it also really puts that question to the White House. What can this president really do about the loan forgiveness failure at SCOTUS? Because there are a lot of Americans who are extremely demoralized by that decision.
Good.
That's exactly the kind of group that you want to show up at the polls. Remember that there's a close alignment between college voters and Democrats at this point.
Boom.
Excuse me, college people with a college degree and Democrats. So,
yeah, and people who are college age as well. Chess Rush, I'm coming with hands down. Come at me with some MAGA crap. Gonna catch these hands. Well done. Dawned on Me says, think about what the Democrats didn't get accomplished. Voting rights, police reform, student debt paid, minimum wage hiked. Yeah, I think, number one, highlighting Democrat accomplishments is going to be important. Highlighting what they didn't get done is going to be important, as long as we are also stressing what they could do. If you talk to somebody who thinks that there's no point in voting, point out how close we were to a much better America. We were literally 2 Senate seats away. We had, really, 1 is all we needed. But we had Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin ruin so many policies for us in the Senate, virtually guaranteeing that they're going to be gone. And thankfully, as nightmarish as it is, one upside to the Supreme Court's consistent de-democratizing of America, consistent abuse of their position, is that they are making sure that the American citizens don't forget how harmful Republican appointees and Republican policies are. They're taking away rights and keeping the GOP heat on. I would rather, if I had to pick, I would rather they didn't harm us in this way. I would rather we use our words to convince people that the GOP are bad for the United States. But the one upside is that throughout a relatively safe time for federal legislation, not state legislation, we're seeing reminders of how lethal the GOP is for the United States. That's going to keep people remembering that. And it's going to have some of those folks voting defensively. Then I would say, point to places like Michigan, point to places, hopefully soon, like Wisconsin, point to places that have state-level success stories. You do not get that without voters going out and making it happen. Your governor has a tremendous amount of power over how you live. Your state legislature has a tremendous amount of power over how you live. Stress that. You're not just fighting for the whole country. You're fighting for your state as well. That is what you're out there doing.
I think that, there's a lot of data to parse here. I don't know that these voters are moving over to the Republican Party. They're just becoming inactive. The larger question of what it says about our politics is pretty depressing, as we've been saying this morning. Some depressing news to parse through, because it suggests that there's not much trust in the system. And this is a generation of kids, of people, of young people who have been failed, as you said, by the failure of gun control, climate change, and now the collapse of the Democratic coalition, it seems, or the risk of it, with the rise of fascism. So it's depressing times, and I think we need those voters back in this system. We need a competitive system, and you can't just lose an entire generation of voters.
Yeah, you think about it, though, just think about what has happened between the midterms and now, right? During the midterms, when we think about Wisconsin, when we think about Michigan, and we think about the role of young voters, particularly in Wisconsin, in some places we were actually saying on this show that young folk actually helped save our democracy. But when I look at your numbers, John, I see the rate, the percentage of young people, Black, Hispanic, and white, who are disappointed in President Biden's performance. What is the
He brought me back. I was ready to do the outro, but all right, let's see this.
Relationship between, right, what we saw in the midterms, that kind of energy, and these sorts of numbers. It's not like it's 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 5 years ago. It's just a midterm. So help us understand these disapproval numbers with regards to the Biden administration.
Eddie, what we first need to understand is that without younger people, there isn't a Biden administration. It was young people in particular in the 5 battleground states in 2020, similar approach in 2022, which made the difference in state after state after state. And essentially, kind of the message of this, I think, research is that past results are no guarantee of future returns. The Democrats need to take this seriously and specifically talk about the tangible differences that the Biden administration has made. I don't believe in my lifetime there's been an agenda that's been more youth forward than the Biden agenda. When you look at bipartisan support for gun safety legislation, a couple generations hasn't happened since then. When you look at the record low employment in 17 states, I think, and a variety of other things like the significant investment climate, but they're not feeling it on a day-to-day basis. That's the concern. When I look at the significant.
All right, well, there's some other concerns. Like, take for example, the fact that things like gun control are a youth concern. Why are they a youth concern? Well, maybe because kids are being shot to death in school. How is that not an all of us concern? Of course it is, but it's just so telling that person phrased it that way. It's a youth concern, these gun control measures. So we're just acknowledging that kids are the ones that get killed. Boy, that tells us really where we stand, doesn't it? We're unwilling to seriously regulate firearms, even though we know what happens when we don't. Kids are killed. Damn us all. We're going to burn for that, and rightly. I'll see y'all there. Bring some sunscreen. But But. What else was? Global warming. The health of our entire planet. Why? Well, the real end of everything, the real doom, that's going to happen in 30, 40 years. It's just going to ramp up till then. But it's a youth concern. Tells us about the American character and how low it has gotten. We have to be better than that. You're here trying. That's what you're here for. Good for you. But don't be afraid to spread that shame around, because we need to hear it. Republicans so often give us the prescription for dealing with them. I remember how much they howled and whined at social justice warriors. Remember that phrase? Even back then, they were telling us what was needed for them. They needed to be shamed. They don't have a moral compass. They need one provided for them. At the very least, they need to be told what decency is, because they don't know. The other thing to consider, it's voters age 18 to 29 in that poll. Well, that's going to be a different group than the voters who were 18 to 29 4 years ago. In fact, about 40% of them will have aged out of that, and 40% of them will be entering in. So it could simply be that a lot of the new folks in that group care less. But then again, they also haven't gone through an election season with ads targeting them when they have the ability to do anything about it. So I suspect that will change, but I do think that it's our obligation to make sure that young voters understand that their vote does have a direct impact on their lives and the lives of others. And they not only can benefit from voting, but they have an obligation to vote. They have an obligation. They have a duty. We all do. If you can, you must. And it's that simple. Because otherwise, the bad guys win. Let's see what the wicked community has to say.